The transfer portal can be approached in many different ways. Oregon's approach is second to none. Last year, the Ducks brought in an absolute haul in the secondary on signing day. This year's haul could be from the big boys up front on the offensive line. Plus, Dan Lanning appeared on a recent edition of the Bussin with the Boys podcast, and man, did he really open up. I've got some takeaways from that always great interview with Will and Taylor. This and a whole lot more on an always stacked edition of That Show Out West.
This place has everything. In fact, the grass is damn green in Eugene.
That performance deserves a holy wallawa.
It's a feeling you cannot explain.
This place is louder than any other venue in the Big Ten.
This program is staged to compete and to win championships.
Welcome to the Big Ten, Oregon.
Welcome to That Show Out West for that team out west. An unbite. No, that's not it. That's not it. A neutral observer. No, that's not it. That's not it either. We might have to write up a 2.0 version of that open because things are changing a little bit up in here. Big visit weekend for the Oregon Ducks this weekend. How about 3 top 100 defensive players coming on campus? Someone like Deuce Gerald's a top 100 defensive lineman. You know, ever since the Tomahini Tipoy flip shutting down his recruitment, I think the Ducks need another defensive lineman in this class, and prying him out of the Southeast, I've said this before, it is not going to be easy, but if they can really impress him and have a great visit, I think that's going to go a long way to see where Oregon stands in that recruitment. Albert Hill, a high-level 4-star recruit from the cornerback position, is coming onto campus this weekend in Eugene as well, and the whispers in the wind say that there might be more top 100 talent visiting Oregon this weekend, and we know there's going to be some big-time visitors for the spring game. Going to be talking more about the spring game in next week's show in the lead-up to that big-time Saturday atmosphere at Autzen Stadium that's going to be broadcasted on the Big Ten Network. Wanted to start off today's show with some news surrounding myself and some news surrounding the show. Now, if you follow me over on Twitter, you kind of know a lot of this news already. But for those of you that live in the podcast world, certainly wanted to break it down for you. Now, I've really explored a lot of different areas in digital media. Of course, audio platforms on the podcast over there. Of course, video platforms, short form like TikTok and Instagram and stuff like that. But there's one area that I really haven't been able to dabble into, but that has come to an end. I am extremely appreciative. I am extremely thankful for the opportunity that Justin Hopkins and Max Torres and everybody over there at Scoop Duck has provided me to now be a contributor over at their website. So I've already got 2 articles up over there on Scoop Duck, so go check those out if you haven't already. But they are going to be tied in with segments from this podcast. So there's going to be a little bit more detail, I think, in those articles. So if you want to be able to really take in some of this content and get a little bit more facts and data out of it, heading over to Scoop Duck and really seeing those articles tied with the videos, I think is going to be a good way to really tie everything together. So once again, extremely grateful for this opportunity that Justin has provided me right now. And I think the further we go down the road, the closer we get towards football season, I think this partnership is going to really get a lot more awesome. Let me tell you that much as well. Spring game is coming up. And we are going to be having some fun after the spring game. When everything wraps up from Autzen, when everything wraps up on the Big Ten Network, come on back here on YouTube because I will be going live for the first edition of that post-game show out west, where, of course, you'll have my reaction breaking down everything from the spring game. And then I want to hear your reactions as well with some live phone calls. Maybe so we'll set up a live video call as well. And then, of course, the live chat we know is going to be on fire as well. So I kind of looked in the Oregon space, and there wasn't a ton of, those like post-game shows, even like call-ins and stuff like that. So I'm really hoping to maybe get this off the ground and really establish that within the Oregon community. So I'm excited about these 2 announcements. And folks, there are more announcements that I cannot talk about right now because They're not completely carved in stone. Contracts have not been signed yet, so to speak, but man, we're growing and we're expanding, and I'm thankful for you for the opportunity that I continue to grow, that I continue to expand, and that I get to continue to talk Ducks. You know, a lot has been made of recruiting momentum, maybe lack of recruiting momentum right now for the Oregon Ducks, and I think a lot of that can be just narrative. It can be a little bit fabricated, I think, to be honest with you, right? But there is a little bit of truth of, you know, hey, this guy commits here, this guy commits there, and hey, oh, then this player over here says, oh, maybe I want to play it there, or there I want to play with that school over there. Like, I still think that there's some truth to it, but I think from a macro perspective, Oregon just operates on their own timeline. Oregon just operates how they're going to operate. What have I said about Dan Lanning before? When it comes to the recruiting trail, he's the ultimate closer. Cue Enter Sandman. He comes in and he closes the deal when the deal needs to be closed. When you talk about making headlines in mid-March, making headlines in late March and early April, even making headlines on Easter weekend, even making headlines after the spring game, in all reality, it doesn't matter until December. And if Dan makes headlines in late April, if he makes headlines in early May, if he makes headlines in June, if he makes headlines in July, fine, so be it. But it's all about the path to get to December to bring as much elite talent onto the University of Oregon campus as possible. And when you talk about elite talent, hey, last year it was all about the defensive backs and that haul that they brought in. This year's haul, it might be all about the big boys up front on the offensive line because, hey, over these next couple of weeks, Oregon might be recruiting like big boys, so it all makes sense that it really centers around the Hogs up front on the offensive line. We talk about the last year's defensive back class, and Naeem Offord and Brandon Finney and Dorian Brew and Trey McNutt. You had 4 guys that were top 80 overall recruits in the country. Like, that was really, really good from Chris Hampton, and it got him 24/7 Sports Recruiter of the Year. But what Alik Terry and this offensive line recruiting staff is doing right now, they're taking what happened last year in the secondary, and they are rising it to another level right now. This offensive line class, specifically the offensive tackle position, might be the strongest position in this 2026 recruiting class. So striking while that iron is hot, I think, is extremely important for this Oregon recruiting staff right now. Jackson Cantwell, Emmanuel Iheanacho, Cody Green, and hey, let's throw in Tommy Tofi in there and let's call it the A-team. Now, I think it's worth noting right off the bat, Oregon will not sign all of these guys. Oregon will not sign 3 elite offensive tackles right now. But I think it's worth noting just where they currently sit with all 3 of these offensive tackles. Jackson Cantwell, boy, that was an interesting saga over this last week, right? He said, hey, I've got all of the information I need. I'm not sure what taking another official visit would really bring for my recruitment. And then, la-di-da, he schedules a official visit for the spring game specifically. Emmanuel Iheanacho was recently on campus. Like, you look at both of those 2 guys, I think Oregon is the top 2. Circling back to Jackson Cantwell, it sounds like Miami is throwing out a pretty big money offer right now. And that's what Miami does. They got a lot of money. Of course, you got Mario, who's a really good recruiter, especially his track record on the offensive line. And he was a former offensive line. Like, that's strong with what they have at the Hurricanes over there. I think him visiting Oregon provides the Ducks an opportunity to come close to that offer. Now, how close does Oregon need to get? And rumor has it that it is a hefty amount of money right now for the hefty boy out of Missouri. But here's the thing about offensive tackles and why this specific recruiting class is so important. I know Oregon went into the portal. They got a guy like Isaiah World, who everybody speaks the world of certainly right now. But offensive line, offensive tackle is one of those positions where it's tough to find an elite player in the transfer portal. You got to be able to throw. There's a reason why offensive tackles, defensive tackles, and some of these very important positions garner the amount of money that they do on the high school recruiting trail. Because if you want an elite player, you gotta spend it now. So I'm very curious to see how much money Oregon is going to possibly put on the table during the spring game visit for Jackson to see if they come close to that Miami offer right now. And that Jackson-Cantwell visit, I think, is really going to create a domino effect of many sorts kind of coming on down the line. Emmanuel Iheanacho was recently on campus. Now, he recently declared Oregon his leader. Now, let's make sure we take this with a grain of salt. He's changed his leaders a lot. Oregon has been his leader at one point. I think Maryland was his leader. Like, he's kind of flip-flopped back and forth, certainly over there. And it's interesting how this is all going to play out. Because if Oregon does get a commitment from Jackson Cantwell, okay, and whatever that financial offer would be at that point in time, you would have commitments from Jackson Cantwell and Cody Green. We know there's been some other schools right now that are trying to flip Cody Green at this moment in time. If you have those two offensive tackles, you're probably not going to be able to throw around all kinds of money. I talked about at the beginning of the segment, you're not going to be able to sign all three. There's just not that much money to be able to throw it around right now. So where does that leave Emmanuel Iheanacho? That's going to be something very interesting to be able to figure out. Like, I could see any one of these combinations. I could see Jackson and Cody. I could see Emmanuel and Cody if Jackson ends up taking that Miami deal after his visit to Oregon. I think there's a possibility out there that we could see Jackson Cantwell commit on his commitment date, which is April 30th. I think we could see Emmanuel Iheanacho. It sounds like maybe late June, early July, something like that for a commitment date for Emmanuel right now. I could see them committing, and then maybe a little bit later on, maybe Cody Green ends up flipping over to USC. So there's all sorts of combinations. I feel very strong. I know On3 puts out like percentages. I feel like at least 80. At least 80 that Oregon is going to land two of these elite level offensive tackles, certainly within this class. One other thing to really think about as it pertains to Oregon's recruitment for these offensive tackles right now is another pending commitment date, Cinco de Mayo, May 5th, Jared Curtis. I think what happens with Jackson Cantwell is not only going to create a domino effect of who's going to commit and who's eventually going to sign where on the offensive line, but I think it's eventually going to really determine what happens with these quarterback dominoes as well. Because if you're a quarterback, if you're Jared Curtis, if you're Ryder Lyons recently on campus in Eugene as well, but if you're a quarterback and you know like the weapons that Oregon can certainly recruit, and now all of a sudden, oh, wait a minute, Oregon's got these elite level offensive linemen, they've got these elite level offensive tackles that are going to be able to protect me. Oh, now all of a sudden that makes Oregon from a quarterback destination perspective, especially with the timeline that Jared or Ryder would be playing at Oregon, all of a sudden I think that makes it even more attractive than it already was. Like we've talked about the Jared Curtis recruitment, what Oregon has done from a production standpoint on offense versus Georgia, like that's already on the table. That's already very visible. But Georgia has been able to recruit extremely well in the trenches on the offensive line. But now if that is pivoting over to Oregon, like Georgia was involved in the Jackson Cantwell recruitment, and they've kind of been, it seems like they've fallen off the wayside a little bit. But if Oregon can land him, I think that really sets the tone that now Oregon is taking maybe one more thing away from Georgia to have one more advantage for them for Jared to possibly make a decision, and then maybe Ryder Lyons as well. You know, everybody's talking about the offensive tackles. One guy in 2026 that people aren't talking about is like the biggest guy of them all, and it's Tommy Tofi out of the Sacramento, California area. Oregon seems to be the favorite right now in that recruitment. How about 6'7", 350 pounds? Like you signed two of these offensive tackles, you signed Tommy Tofi, and then you look to last year, you signed four players, offensive linemen I'm talking about, in the top 175 overall in the country, like Zaire Addison over there at offensive tackle. A lot of good things have been said about Douglas Utu in there at offensive guard. So you take those guys, those four, you combine them with these potentially 3 this year. That's 7 blue chip offensive linemen. And we know national championships, the ever elusive national championship, they are built in the trenches. I've talked about on this show how good I feel about the deep defensive line room right now. You translate it to what Alik Terry is doing and the development, right, with guys like a Jackson Powers-Johnson and a Josh Connerly and some of these guys. And if they do it with Isaiah World and really turn him into what some people think he could be, like it just can. This offensive line and the culture, like back-to-back Joe Moore Award finalists, the culture and the reputation of the offensive line at Oregon just continues to go up and continues to go up and continues to go up. And you combine that with the elite level quarterback play and some of the weapons that they have. This is an Oregon offense, I think, that is flying certainly higher than maybe they've ever flown before. And it's rightfully due to maybe some of the big boys up front on the offensive line. Talent acquisition, recruiting. It's the name of the game in college football. And I just won't limit it to college, really in any level of football. If you want to have a great team, you got to have great players. And Oregon has developed a reputation for being great in talent acquisition of many kinds. High school recruiting, we talk about it every single week on the show. How fun is it to talk about Oregon recruiting every single week? Because, bringing in top 5 class after top 5 class back-to-back, top 5 classes for the Oregon Ducks in the high school ranks, and they've certainly established that in terms of that realm. But I think going even further back than those back-to-back high school classes is what Dan was able to do when he was hired in late 2021, and of course that first season in 2022 is, I think, the transfer portal and their approach to the transfer portal has contributed to, it's been a big building block, and it's contributed to them making steps up on the college football ladder. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The transfer portal is a very unique tool right now in college football. It can be used in many different ways. Different coaches use it in many different ways. I know now, like 2024 going into 2025, it's changed a lot, even when Dan first came in 2022. And I think like coaches, it's when they come in and they kind of know that, hey, the clock is ticking. You're working on a short timeline. I think a lot of coaches now, and like I said, now might be different than a few years ago, but the nature is to be like 35 transfers out and 28 or 30 transfers in. I think that's kind of, hey, we got to retool this program. We got to try to find as many guys that try to fit the traits of what we want to be able to do. When Dan came in, he had a grand total of 10 transfers in that very first class in 2022. The maximum amount of transfers he's taken so far was that 2023 transfer class where he took 15. Before I really go any further, and before I talk about Dan and the continued approach and how well that they've done in the transfer portal, my inspiration for this idea really came from a recent press conference from one of the top tier transfers in the 2025 transfer class, that being Dylan Thieneman.
Oregon's really good at taking in transfers and developing them and transitioning them to the next level. I mean, this defense, it kind of sets you up for that level because of like we play all types of coverages, like we do all types of things that you'll see at the next level.
So when you have a player of that caliber saying Oregon is known for being a destination for transfers, they are known for taking in players that have spent a year, 2 years, maybe 3 years at another school, and they're here, but I want to get to here. I want to get to the NFL. I want to be a second-round pick. I want to be a first-round pick. Dylan Thieneman recognizes, and he chose Oregon, and it's been widely reported, that Dylan Thieneman, or Oregon, did not offer Dylan Thieneman the highest money offer. So their reputation, Dan's reputation, the staff's reputation with taking transfers and really elevating them to that next level. Let's talk about Oregon's approach and their strategy, because I think it's their strategy is what I really like the most right now. Strategy point number 1, don't over-recruit the portal. I just laid it out. 2022, 10 transfers. 2023, 15 transfers. 2024, 12 transfers. Right now in 2025, they're sitting at 10. Less is more. Quality over quantity, I think, is a big thing. And then ace your evaluation. Okay? Like, Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to evaluate like a group of 5 player. Like, oh, he put up this type of production, he put up this type of numbers, but it was against this type of competition. Okay, you have a guy like Dylan Thieneman is a great example. Okay, the defense was 131st in college football last year, but you have to try to isolate him on its own. And to say, hey, we run this type of system. Okay, what does this film tell us? How talented is he? And how can he be plugged into this system? I think Oregon has done a tremendous job evaluating high school players, and I think they have done a tremendous job evaluating transfer portal players as well. When Oregon goes shopping in the transfer portal, they find guys that are most of the time they're finding guys that are making an immediate impact, that are filling a hole that needs to be filled in the starting lineup, above the line plus players. Like, you go down the list when Oregon is looking for a transfer player, and you look at when the portal's closed, you look at all the players that Oregon has brought in, 70 to 80% of them are being plugged into the starting lineup immediately when fall camp gets underway. That goes back to quality over quantity. You see some other programs out there that are taking bigger numbers. Oregon will not be a program that will take bigger numbers, because I think even from the start, Dan realized that said, hey, if we want to be a national championship caliber team, and that's been the goal ever since day one, is to turn the 0 into a 1. Okay? Ever since day one, I think he's realized if we overload our roster with transfers, that takes away an opportunity for us to recruit a player with a higher ceiling that's going to get us to that level to be able to win a national championship. Transfers have a role. And even if Oregon recruits the number 1 class in the country for the next 5 to 6 years, Oregon is still going to have a need for some transfers, because, hey, even if you load up on all of this high quality talent, it's a nature of the system that some kids are going to transfer out because they just don't get the opportunity. That's the current world of college football that we live in. And it's a nature that when some of those guys transfer out, or some of these moving parts line up the way they do, you're going to need to go out there and get an experienced player to plug into that hole, certainly as well. One thing that's worth noting, I think that's been impressive throughout Dan's tenure as head coach when it comes to transfer portal, is they're very selective. I talked about that before, but they're very selective of who they target. They're very selective of who they bring on campus. Now, I could be very wrong on this, but to my knowledge, the only player that they've brought in for a transfer visit to come to Eugene and have not been able to seal the deal on is Walter Nolan. That was last year's portal class, and he eventually went over to Ole Miss. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody else out there. I'm sure there is. But the point I'm trying to make is when transfers get onto campus in Eugene, and I don't even think Dan really makes his pitch, but they see what the environment is about. They talk to the staff. They talked to some of the current players. Bear Alexander talked about how he talked to Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell, and they told him, hey, this is going to be hard, but they're going to get the most out of you. They're going to get you to be able to reach your ceiling and maybe beyond that and get you to the league. Because that's what it's all about, I think, for these players, certainly at the college level. And I think Oregon provides a platform that just some people like these transfers are certainly looking for. Now being in the Big Ten Conference and having the success that they do, like you look at a guy like Mekhi Hughes that's transferring in. Okay, he's certainly on an NFL path with those back-to-back 1,300, 14-yard rushing seasons. But a lot of times, and like even you could even say Dylan Thieneman at Purdue, like even at a Big Ten school, like getting in it on a team that's just you're playing with better players and you're having better coaching, you're just going to be better, especially like when you're in practice. When you have good on good, going into that environment it's going to make you a better player. You're going to progress faster. You're going to improve to get you to your eventual goal, which of course is to be as highly drafted, I think, as you can possibly. And win a few games, certainly along the road as well. But that's got to be, I think, one of the big selling points for Oregon, especially with the track record of what we've seen, is that guys can come from wherever they've been playing They're going to be playing on a bigger platform at Oregon, on a proven winning team, and they're going to be able to elevate themselves and get to the NFL. Like Bo Nix is a perfect example of this. I've got a handful written here, and I'll kind of list them off. But Bo Nix, like, look how he was struggling at Auburn. They kind of threw him into the fire right away down south. He had a lot of pressure because his dad played there and all of that. He transfers out to Oregon, and he's a completely different quarterback. Heisman finalist, and what was he drafted? 15th overall. Had a great rookie season with the Denver Broncos. Tez Johnson is a guy that was playing kind of like Mekhi Hughes. He was playing at the Group of 5 level, a lower level of college football, and I think he had a lot of talent at that level and put up some pretty good numbers, but he needed a bigger platform, I think, and he needed to play with better players. Hey, having Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel throwing the football to you certainly doesn't hurt. And that's what Oregon provided him. And I think that he could have a good career, certainly in the NFL, as a slot receiver, maybe a return specialist as well. Bucky Irving. Like, Bucky's an interesting example because he was playing behind Muhammad Ibrahim at Minnesota, who ended up being the leading rusher in Golden Gopher history. All right, they had a stable of running backs when he played there prior to Bucky Irving transferring in 2022. I can think he had something like 770 rushing yards at Minnesota. Like, he was already certainly developing over there, but he needed that opportunity to be a number one back somewhere. And a lot of times it's just opportunity. And Oregon provides that high level of opportunity and winning and being on the big stage that some of these guys certainly crave. The proof is in the pudding, I think, when it comes to transfers. And now the 25 guys. Because I think you take all of this information, and it's very clear what Oregon has been able to establish as far as the transfer portal approach. But there's some guys in the 2025 class where there could be some questions around. Like Bear Alexander is a big one. Okay? When I heard that Bear was coming onto campus at Oregon, my first thought was maybe like, I don't know. I mean, we feel pretty good on the defensive line, maybe a little bit of a head scratcher. But then when you dive into it a little bit, this is an opportunity for Bear. We've talked about low risk, high reward when it comes to him as well. But them signing him, them taking him in, I think once that was really announced, that kind of like, I had confidence in this staff based on what they'd done in the past in the transfer portal. And I've got a lot more confidence that Bear Alexander is going to work out in a big way at Oregon this season and in the future, certainly if he plays that second year of eligibility that he has available to him. Isaiah World is another guy that a lot of people say he's got a lot of raw talent. But what have we said about the offensive line? Back-to-back Joe Moore Award winners. There is great coaching on the offensive line here at Oregon. So you got a guy that has all the tools, that's got that NFL frame at offensive tackle. You plug him into this system. I think you have to have the confidence that a guy like an Isaiah World, even an Alex Harkey, those guys from the Group of 5 level are going to work out as transfers at Oregon because it's been proven before. I'm extremely excited about what these 2025 transfers can do in Eugene, this system. And it's all due to the blueprint that has been laid and the strategy that has been put forth by this coaching staff and the overall staff surrounding this Oregon football program. I want to move from the macro level transfer portal talk to more specific level transfer portal talk, and that's what's happening right now. The spring transfer portal is open right now, and I've talked about how less is more, but Oregon is over that 105 roster limit, and they saw their first entry into the transfer portal, that being Roderick Pleasant. Let's start with that when we look at our early portal headlines here in the spring. Now, here's the thing about Rod, okay? Class of 2023 recruit, top 100 guy, 4-star corner. Now, he's a little bit smaller in stature, right? When you've heard Tosh Lupoi talk about it in press conferences, you've heard Chris Hampton, you talk about size, length, and speed. Coach Hampton has talked about that before. And Pleasant a little bit on the shorter side, Pleasant a little bit on the smaller side, certainly as well. So when you talk about those traits, I think there's other guys in the secondary that maybe stand out a little bit more of what they want a little bit more, certainly right now. But I think Pleasant, like when we've talked about, I've talked about it, when you've heard coaches talk about it, when you've heard other podcasters talk about it, you say, oh, there's this guy, that guy, that guy, that guy, that guy. Roderick Pleasant was not listed in that. When we talked about the depth and all of the young talent in the secondary, Roderick Pleasant was not one of those guys mentioned. That was not coming out of my mouth. That was not coming out of really anybody else's mouth right now. So I think that was very telling to sit, this last recruiting class with McNutt, with Offord, with Finney, with Brew, right? That didn't help guys that maybe had been in this program for a year or two that were really in battles, and you have this high level of talent coming in, right? It's just, you're going to see some guys that are going to transfer out, and I think that's what happened here with Roderick Pleasant. I think another thing with him that I don't want to say it was like a detriment or anything like that, but I'll just say it was a little bit of a challenge, was he was on the track team. And of course, track takes place during the spring. And spring football and spring practice is a big opportunity for someone like him that's maybe a little bit lower on the depth chart to be able to stand out. And when you're not there as much, it's hard to really rise up that depth chart. So I'm very curious to see wherever Roderick goes in the future, where he's going to balance that with his track and field career. So that's something to keep in mind. But I think Rod he's a talented kid. He's a talented player. I think if he goes to the right spot, he can have a bright future. Maybe, just maybe, even be an NFL type of draft pick possibly in the future. So that's the departure that we're talking about right now. There's going to be more departures, but there's one player that entered the portal on its first day that I put out a tweet about it, and there were other Oregon reporters that kind of put out the eyeball emoji about it as well, and it's Trebor Pena. Trebor Pena was a wide receiver at Syracuse last season. Syracuse, wide receivers, Ross Douglas. That's the connection. Those are the puzzle pieces that are being put together right now. Now, he's attractive because of the huge jump that he took. He's in that, he works out of the slot a lot more. I know there's, you have Decorian Moore, Evan Stewart maybe a little bit more comfortable playing out of the slot. I know you got guys like a Justice Lowe who's played out of there, Gary Bryant Jr. that's played out of that position before. I think we don't know what the slot receiver position is going to look like. I think that's the point I'm trying to make right now. And we've seen Trebor Pena have success at Syracuse, certainly working out of that position. 84 catches, 941 yards, and 8 touchdowns last season. But that's, I think, the attractiveness, but you need to work in the reality. This Oregon wide receiver room is loaded. Okay? And I've talked about this many, many times since the show launched in January. There's name after name after name after name after name after name. That battle for wide receiver 3 is one of the biggest battles, hot and heavy battle in spring practice, and it will be in the summer, and it will be going into fall camp certainly as well. So there's not room at the end, plain and simple. As the roster is in its current state right now, there's no room at the end for Trebor Pena. And then you hear the comments that Fran Brown made. Quote, nobody else making that money ain't giving no wide receiver $2 million in college. Like, that's getting paid more than some coordinators at the college level, certainly right now. Like, he was saying it in his quote, in another piece of that quote, that's like, that's Jeremiah Smith money. All right, that's higher than maybe a good amount of quarterbacks possibly out there as well. So, like, I think NIL-wise, and this portal cycle is maybe resetting the market a little bit, whereas, players were really taking control, but now maybe some coaches and some teams are taking control back and be like, dude, these numbers are absurd. We're not going to pay you that. So guys like a Nico Maliava, possibly, not saying it will happen, but possibly something here with Trebor Pena, say you have some of these teams that say, dude, we're not going to pay you $2 million. Yes, we respect what you did last year at Syracuse, but that's just an absurd amount of money. So now we're going to really find out where the level is right now. And what happens if Jurian Dickey transfers out? What happens if Gary Bryant Jr., don't think that's going to happen, but he transferred. What happens if Justice Lowe transfers out? What happens if what happens if a group of these guys transfer out? Maybe at that point, because of the connection that I just talked about, going to have to lower your asking price, I think, for Pena to be able to come into Oregon. But I think that could be a scenario, whether it's Trebor or whether it's another receiver, where you could see that certainly coming about, where all these receivers look around and be like, dude, we got a crowded room. They brought in Malik Benson. We know Decorian Moore is going to be up there as well. Look, if I'm going to get an opportunity, I got to go somewhere else. So I think it's going to take at least 2 transfer departures for Oregon to look at a wide receiver like Trebor Pena to be able to come in. Could it happen? Yeah, it could happen because Oregon is over the roster limit and this was a loaded room. But I don't know if it will happen. So that's kind of where I stand with Trebor Pena and the people that have maybe connected the dots as it pertains to him possibly making his way to Eugene. College football head coaches. Boy, isn't that an interesting breed of human being. But I think now in today's day and age of media and podcasts and coaches making appearances in different platforms, I think we'll see a lot different sides in different arenas that we do from college football coaches that we saw before. Like the access before was game day, sideline interviews, press conferences. And like you look at those arenas, like it's sometimes not the most comfortable setting for coaches exactly to open up. Take it from someone who was a reporter in a previous version of my career, that had been in Division I college football press conferences, that have been in, professional press conferences. It is a very structured type of environment, and it maybe doesn't suit the personality of some of these guys as well. Like you watch Dan Lanning in a press conference. He's short with a lot of the media. He's very tight-lipped. I think with a lot of the media, and that, like, if you just watch that in a tunnel, you might form a certain opinion of what Dan is. But then you see him appear on Bussin with the boys, and you see a completely different side of Dan Lanning. And I love to see this side of Dan because Dan just seems like a guy that you would just love to just have a beer with and just talk ball. Like, he is just smiling. Like, look at this picture. He is straight cheesing. If you're watching this on YouTube, he is straight cheesing in this interview, sitting across from Will Compton and Taylor Lewan. So you love to see this side of Dan and this personable side. Certainly, like, there's questions that Will and Taylor asked that traditional media asked. Like, traditional media asked these questions about, like, 12 man on the field against Ohio State, about the Rose Bowl loss to Ohio State, and you got fairly structured, maybe dancing around the question a little bit. With the traditional media, with Taylor and Will, he was completely open and completely different answer on a variety of topics as well. So I think for fans, it gives us a little bit of an inside look and a little bit more of an open look of the head coach of this Oregon Ducks football program. So I loved every minute of this interview. I watched the whole thing. It was awesome. And I'm going to give kind of some takeaways and some things that really stood out to me in this interview. First of all, Dan and Ducks, they love the boys. They love the boys. They love Will Compton. They love Taylor Lewan. They love broing out. Look, it's not my thing. It's not my type of personality. But like Will and Taylor, I think connect a lot with the players. Taylor Lewan, I think, recently retired from the NFL. Will Compton had a career that was, I think, fairly recent as well. Like, you have guys, I think, kind of just the way they are and the way college kids are, I think they can kind of relate to that as well, and they get excited, they get interested. Like Dan said on this podcast, it said, there was a different buzz around practice when Will and Taylor were certainly both there as well. So having Dan, the boys, and the Ducks all kind of be there, feeding off of each other, I think was great. Like Taylor talked about the culture specifically of the offensive line. He was in the offensive line room. The culture was great surrounding this Oregon football program, which of course you love to see. And it allows, like, these guys have a big platform. So they can take what they saw in Eugene and they can kind of spread it to the masses. And I think that kind of relates to a little bit of the younger generation, and it gets that kind of reputation out there, certainly a little bit more of the positives that surround this Oregon Ducks football program. Second point that I have here, Dan is the perfect style of coach for modern college football. He has the perfect approach within modern college football. Here's a soundbite that I'm talking about that really backs up my point.
How many snaps am I going to play for Oregon next year? Zero. It doesn't matter what I know. It's about what your players know and what they can execute. So, there's a lot of negatives that surround what people talk about, like the portal and how that exists. The truth is the portal is revealing a lot of character of programs, right? And here you have a relationship with your coach. There's connection. You feel like you can talk to this guy about stuff beyond football, right? And I think that relationship is really important. It's not coach-player, right? It's coach-player. And that's the guy that has to go execute. That means he has to love the guy that he's playing for. He's got to believe in what we're doing. How do you create belief? Guys want to know the why today, right? 20 years ago, we would have ran through any wall, whatever the coach said, and I'm not trying to run gassers after practice because I did it wrong. Now it's not about like establishing fear. It's about just establishing a true relationship of this guy's making me better. He's making me improve. Something I learned early as a coach is that every player is different, right? I've been around coaches before who says, I'm going to coach you all the same. Like the reality is you're not getting the best out of a player if you coach everybody the same. So for me, I feel like this world has kind of revealed character, not necessarily the other way around. And for me, I've always coached guys different. I'd coach Bo Nix a little bit different than Dylan Gabriel, right? I'd coach Tez Johnson a little bit different than Trayshawn Holden. I just think that's how you get the best out of people, right? Some guys you can confront right there in front of them on the field, and we certainly do that, right? Those are the fun ones, right? And then some guys you got to put your arm around them, and it looks a little bit different. I don't think it's changed the way that we coach here. I think it's heightened the awareness of being prepared for the next moment. Like what could happen if this doesn't go right? A guy had a bad day on the practice field. Okay, what's your reaction as a coach? And trying to be proactive rather than reactive in those moments.
You listen to that soundbite from the podcast, and it just seems so obvious. The way he kind of lays out, hey, you need to have a relationship with your position coach, with your coordinator, with your head coach, and we need to be able to really do what suits you to be able to get you at the highest level of football. Because if you have a guy that does not respond to like an intimidation factor to really getting on a guy in practice, and like Dan said, you kind of got to put your arm around him, like you're not going to just yell at him constantly because you're not going to get the most out of that. Like when I played high school football in the state of Wisconsin, like I played for a coach that was very much intimidation factor. He coached everybody the same way. It was his way or it was the highway. And I did not respond well to that. So I was not able to maybe be as good as I possibly could be. But today's day and age of college football is very different. You cannot, like the Sabans of the world, and especially like the Urban Meyers of the world, when these players, when they weren't getting paid, I think you could have more of these, like, if you want to say disciplinarians or these like almost like God level college football coaches, especially the ones that did so much winning, like the ones that I just mentioned here before. Now, where you got a player that's making $1 million, you got a player that's making $1.5 million. All of a sudden, you can't talk down to them as much as you previously could. I think NIL has really changed the approach, and I think it's a generation of players, maybe a little bit as well, where you got to meet them somewhere in the middle, like Dan certainly said. You got to approach this as a relationship, right? As a mutual relationship instead of, hey, I'm up here and you're down here and you got to be able to listen to me. I remember Dan in a recent press conference talking about, hey, the 105 roster limit and all of the changes within college football. He's like, hey, doesn't matter. We got to continue to evolve. Whatever the rules are, we know it's going to be changing and we got to continue to adapt. And I think his coaching style and his coaching approach and his relations, like you hear everybody say when you talk about recruiting, Dan Lanning is great when it comes to forming relationships on the recruiting trail, when it comes to forming relationships with high school coaches, when it comes to forming relationships with parents, when it comes to forming relationships with players. So it should be no surprise that he has been able to master this as well. So I thought that was very telling, and that answer during his interview certainly as well. Coaches are not on the pedestal that they used to be. And you can see somebody like this interview was a perfect example of, like, Dan Lanning he's a very personable guy. And I think he's very easy to be able to get along with. So I think that certainly all ties together as well. Another point that I took away from this podcast was Lanning knows in a couple of different ways that Oregon is a destination program.
Time you're traveling, what built up? The anticipation. The whole time you're sitting here saying, how good is this about to be? And you get here, how's it been?
It has been incredible.
Elite. It's elite. And I always talk to guys in recruiting. It's really simple. Am I picking best or am I picking most convenient? right? If it's about most convenient, right? I'm from Missouri. You're from Missouri. You would have been to Southeast Missouri, right? Like, it's not about most convenient, right? You would have been over there at Arizona State. Who knows what it would have looked like? It's about picking best. And what Oregon provides is one of the best opportunities in the nation to get developed, get recruited, be a part of a program that's unbelievable. And that's what we look for. It's not about the easiest. It's about the one that makes the most sense. And I do feel like this age group is like the group that I connect with unbelievably. And then more than that, like, I always think back to, it seems like everybody's always thinking about what's next. And for me, like, I'm more of the thank you. Like, I get to do this here. Like, I can't imagine going to do this somewhere else because of the opportunity that Oregon's given me. And then so often everybody's like, well, I can go do this somewhere. Like, I want to do it here. I want to make it happen here because they believed in me, right? It wasn't like I was a head coach coming from somewhere else. Here I was a D coordinator and hadn't been a head coach, right? I coached a third grade basketball team in high school, right? Like, so they gave me an opportunity, like, why not do it here? I promised my kids, like, when we came here, like, you're going to get to graduate from the same middle school, the same high school. Like, my kids have lived in 8 states. Yeah. Right? That's crazy. Man, so, like, now, military lifestyle. So for me, it's like, it's not even a thought. Like, as long as we win, because if I don't hold up that part, I won't be here. Yeah. Right? As long as we win, like, I can't see myself anywhere else.
Dan laid out some really good points there as it pertains to the destination that is Eugene, not only for recruiting players, but where he stands as a current head coach. Like, let's talk about it first from the player perspective. We know, like, I always kind of reference back to this every so often, a video that I did on the Big Ten TED channel that talks about how I thought Oregon was the coolest program in college football. Like, we know about the resources. We know they've always had top-tier facilities. We know, hey, that they've got Oregon has great fans. We know about Nike. We know about the jerseys. Like, we know about all of these things. And you package it up in the Pacific Northwest, and you put the mountains in the background, and like, just like, we hear it all the time in recruiting. Hey, we just got to get them on a visit. We just got to show them how Oregon is different. Like that, you hear a lot from people. Man, Oregon, it's just different. I'm looking forward personally to going to Eugene, to going to different parts of Oregon, and just seeing what it's all about this summer as well. And then you look at it from a coach perspective. Like, Dan has done a fantastic job at leveraging all the resources. So we talk about it in terms of attractiveness for players, how it's a destination for some of these players. And once they see everything, it's like, wow, yeah, of course I want to come here. But then you look at it from Dan, like there's been, like, of course the Alabama job came open, and maybe in the future there's going to be some other jobs that are come open. Like, where else would you go? Like, if you give the coldest of shoulders to a school like Alabama, and you don't even give that the time of day, where else are you going to go? Oregon, Dan has done a great job at leveraging all of the resources available, better than probably any coach that Oregon has had in their history. Like, we're only in we're going in year 4, I think, with Dan, and what he's been able to do, how far he's been able to take what Oregon has and then take his skill set, combine it, and certainly take it to the next level. It's very clear that for himself and his family, this is a destination. Okay, he said he has during this podcast, he has an ultimate pursuit of the ring to win a championship. He's an ultra motivated guy, certainly, and he realizes how much of a destination Eugene, Oregon certainly is in the college football world. Let's talk about motivation a little bit right now. I preface this segment by saying, hey, Dan doesn't really open up that much to traditional media. He was asked about, I think, his first media availability this spring about the Ohio State loss, and he's like, it's a new season, it's behind us, it's all of that as well. But then, now he has this interview with Will and with Taylor, and he opened up a lot more. He opened up a lot more, talking about the medicine that comes through with the motivation from a loss like that Rose Bowl loss on January 1st.
The easy thing in those moments, especially afterwards, is like, let me make excuses of why, right? But if you're a growth mindset guy, right? If you're wired like we are here, to me, it's like, how do I make sure this doesn't happen again, right? You got to learn from that moment. If you're motivated the right way, those moments, those are growth moments. That's a chance to say, okay, I'm going to go improve.
Yeah. Did that medicine last a little bit longer? Just knowing
that medicine, I wake up every night about that medicine. Like, before we struggled early on beating Washington in when I first started here, and we were able to get over that hump, right? We were able to beat them this past season. Right now, I wake up thinking about that Rose Bowl game and didn't do it the way I wanted to do it. So it motivates me.
It's interesting how he brings up the whole Washington deal where they lost 3 consecutive times to Washington, and that was the hurdle that needed to be climbed. Right? And I've talked about this before of how this program continues to grow and continues to really take steps up the ladder. Okay, they losing to Oregon State that first year and then losing to Washington, and they really conquered that and really showed the direction that they're taking as opposed to their rivals. And now Ohio State is really sitting there, and that Rose Bowl is now sitting there as the next level of motivation. Okay, we've all seen Ducks versus them. We've seen how Dan Lanning, whether it's with his words, he can really be a wordsmith with really some things right now, or however he does it. But he is an extremely great coach when it comes to motivating his players and really getting the most out of them in terms of that respect. And I said this all the way back in January. That Dan is going to use this as a motivational factor, not only for himself, and you heard what he said in that clip in terms of how this loss keeps him up at night, how this loss continues to motivate him certainly going forward, but it's not only he's going to be able to take that and what he thinks about, and he's going to be able to translate that certainly to his players, so he continues to take that next step up. And it's all about the continued growth. Dan Lanning is yet to be 40 years old. And I've talked about this before. Dan Lanning is learning and he's growing at an elite level. Some people learn and grow when they're going 7-5 at Toledo. Dan is learning and growing when he's going 13-1, winning a Big Ten championship. All right? Like, these are the obstacles. And Dan is still kind of figuring, I think, some things out. I think that's very clear. But, man, I think this motivation from how this last season ended is going to continue to take this team certainly up the ladder. I loved seeing him open up. I love seeing this side of Dan Lanning in this podcast with Bussin' with the boys. So more of Will, more of Taylor, I think equals more of the Dan Lanning that we certainly like to see, and him opening up a little bit more on some of these topics surrounding Oregon football. Another great edition here of TSOW here today. Spring game is coming up. Remember, that post-game show out west will be live following the spring game. We're going to be talking more about the spring game certainly next week. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Until next time, I'm Ted LaRue. This has been That Show Out West.